Salmon, eggs, milk. They seem harmless, right? But what if these everyday foods are hiding risks that could harm your health in ways you'd never expect? From heart complications to shocking cancer links, this is information you don't want to miss. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 3 of the most common foods out there. You've seen them in health magazines, heard about their benefits, but what about the risks nobody's talking about? These foods may contain some nutrients, but they also come with some unexpected dangers that could impact your health. If you're ready to get the full story, let's dive right in and uncover what's really on your plate. Salmon. Alright, so let's start with salmon. When you think about salmon, you probably picture those bright pink fillets that everyone says are full of omega-3s, right? We've all heard that omega-3 fatty acids are fantastic for heart health, lowering inflammation, and even improving brain function. But here's where it gets interesting. Eating too much salmon can actually lead to some unexpected health issues. Let's talk about it. Let's start with a shocking reality. Parasites in salmon. Worm parasites, especially anisakid nematodes, roundworms, are a frequent problem in both farmed and wild salmon. These parasites can survive in undercooked or improperly frozen fish, making their way to your plate. Alarming reports have even surfaced of customers finding worms in salmon purchased from popular grocery stores like Costco. Farmed salmon is particularly notorious. Overcrowded fish pens create a breeding ground for parasites, requiring fish farmers to use toxic chemicals and antibiotics to control outbreaks. These substances can remain in the fish, raising health concerns for consumers. Even eating wild salmon isn't entirely safe. While it has fewer pollutants, it can still carry parasites along with mercury and carcinogens absorbed from polluted waters. Cooking and freezing can help kill parasites, but they won't eliminate the persistent toxins like mercury and persistent organic pollutants or POPs. Whether farmed or wild, salmon comes with risks that go beyond its reputation as a healthy food choice. Now there's something else you should be concerned with when it comes to eating salmon, and it's bleeding problems. I know this might sound strange because we're talking about a fish that many claim to be good for you. Here's the deal. Omega-3 fatty acids, like those found in salmon, are natural anticoagulants, which basically means they can thin your blood. If you're taking anticoagulant drugs, like blood thinners, adding high doses of omega-3s from salmon can increase your risk of bleeding. So for any benefits that the omega-3s provide, there's also a risk of going overboard. So it's best to avoid salmon, especially if you're on certain medications. Now, let's dive into something called persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. Ever heard of them? They're industrial chemicals that linger in our environment. And yes, they can end up in the fish we eat, like salmon. These POPs are linked to some pretty serious health issues, like type 2 diabetes and obesity. And here's a fun fact. Not all salmon are created equal in this regard. Farmed salmon actually has POP levels that are 5 to 10 times higher than wild salmon. So if you're opting for farmed salmon thinking it's the same as wild, this is something to keep in mind. POPs stick to fatty tissues, so every bite of farmed salmon can come with a little extra pollution you didn't sign up for. But it doesn't stop there. There's also a risk of cancer when it comes to eating large amounts of fish like salmon. It's not the fish itself that's the problem, it's the water they swim in. Fish, unfortunately, can pick up carcinogens, cancer-causing chemicals, from polluted waters. And while wild salmon is generally better in terms of benefits outweighing risks, this is something both farmed and wild salmon have in common. There's still this small catch when it comes to pollution and potential cancer risks. And let's not forget about mercury. You've probably heard about mercury in fish before. It's a metal that's not great for us, to say the least. While salmon doesn't have as much mercury as, say, swordfish or king mackerel, it still contains some. For most of us, this isn't a huge deal in moderate amounts. But for pregnant women and young kids, or if you're regularly eating salmon as part of your diet, it's a much bigger concern. High mercury levels can actually harm a developing fetus or young children's nervous systems. So if you're expecting or have young ones, This is definitely something to consider before reaching for salmon at the grocery store. Eggs. Now let's crack open the egg debate. Literally. Eggs are high in protein, but there's a bit more going on behind the shell. Did you know that about 60% of the calories in eggs come from fat, most of which is saturated fat? That's the kind of fat we're often told to limit. And then there's cholesterol. Oh boy. Each egg has around 200 milligrams of cholesterol, which is more than double what's in a Big Mac. Fat and cholesterol both play a role in heart health, but too much can actually increase the risk of heart disease. Several studies have looked at egg consumption and cholesterol levels, and there's some pretty strong evidence linking eggs to raised LDL cholesterol. Yep, that's the bad cholesterol. For example, a meta-analysis that pulled together data from 13 different clinical trials found that people who ate 1 to 3 eggs a day had higher LDL cholesterol than those who ate none. The problem here is that elevated LDL cholesterol is a big risk factor for heart disease, and the longer it stays elevated, the higher the risk. But there's more. Research published in the journal Circulation looked at egg and cholesterol consumption in over 27,000 people and found that eating even 1 egg per day increased the risk of dying from heart disease. Another study, from 2021, discovered that just half an egg per day was associated with higher death rates from heart disease, cancer, and all other causes combined. So for every 300 milligrams of dietary cholesterol you add each day, mortality risk can jump by as much as 24%. Now you may have heard that some studies claim eggs don't affect cholesterol levels or heart disease risk. But here's an interesting tidbit. A lot of that research is actually industry-funded. A review in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine looked at all the studies on eggs and cholesterol published from 1950 to 2019. They found that, since the 1970s, more studies were funded by the egg industry, and while 85% of studies showed that eggs negatively affect cholesterol, about half of the industry-funded ones downplayed these effects. So, something to keep in mind. And it's not just heart disease. There's also a link between eating eggs and diabetes. One study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that people who regularly ate eggs had a 60% higher risk of diabetes compared to those who ate fewer eggs. And a review of 14 studies in the journal Atherosclerosis showed that people who ate the most eggs had a 68% higher risk of diabetes. The evidence keeps adding up. And for women, especially during pregnancy, there's even a risk of gestational diabetes with high egg consumption. Now here's a shocking one. Cancer. Some research suggests that each additional egg you eat per day increases the risk of dying from cancer by 13%. And it doesn't stop there. Men who eat more than 2.5 eggs per week have an 81% higher risk of lethal prostate cancer compared to those who eat less than half an egg per week. Eggs may also be linked to cancers like ovarian, breast, and colon cancer. So while eggs offer great nutrients, it's clear that moderation is important. Milk. All right, so let's get into dairy. Milk, cheese, yogurt, you name it. Dairy is a staple in many diets, but just like salmon and eggs, there's a flip side here too. Dairy can actually be a trigger for skin issues like acne and eczema. You might be thinking, how does milk affect my skin? Well, studies have shown that teenagers with acne tend to drink more low-fat or skim milk. And it's not just teens. Adults can be affected too. Milk can impact hormones like insulin and insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, which can cause oil production in the skin and lead to breakouts. So if you have any of these skin conditions, you might want to pay attention to how your skin reacts to dairy. Now let's talk about the association with consuming dairy and osteoporosis. There's lots of evidence and studies on this. Milk is often touted as a bone-strengthening powerhouse due to its calcium content, but the relationship between dairy and osteoporosis is more complex than it seems. A Harvard Nurses' Health study involving over 77,000 women found that high dairy intake did not reduce fracture risk. In fact, higher consumption was linked to an increased risk of bone fractures. Another study in the British Medical Journal suggested excessive milk consumption might raise mortality rates, possibly due to inflammatory effects of lactose and galactose. While calcium is crucial for bone health, non-dairy calcium sources like leafy greens or fortified alternatives, such as fortified plant-based milks, can be a much safer and more effective route to take compared to dairy, since dairy may end up weakening your bones, not strengthening them. Then there's the issue of allergies. Around 7.5% of children are estimated to have a milk allergy. It's one of the more common childhood food allergies, and it can cause reactions like eczema, colic, and even more serious issues like anaphylaxis. Symptoms range from skin reactions to digestive issues like constipation, diarrhea, and colic. Children often outgrow milk allergies, but adults can develop them too. If you're experiencing things like wheezing or digestive trouble after having dairy, it might be worth checking in with a doctor. And we can't forget cancer. Excess calcium, especially from dairy, has been linked to a higher risk of prostate cancer. Some research also suggests that the sugars in milk might be linked to a slightly increased risk of ovarian cancer. It's all about balance here. While calcium is essential, too much from certain sources could potentially carry risks. If you're concerned, leafy greens and other calcium-rich foods can be good alternatives. Lastly, let's talk about lactose intolerance. Did you know that around 65 to 70% of the world's population has some form of lactose intolerance? Cow's milk is naturally high in lactose, and for people who are lactose intolerant, consuming it can cause digestive discomfort, bloating, and other symptoms. So if dairy has you feeling a little off, you might be part of the lactose-intolerant crowd. So what do you think? Surprised by the hidden risks in these everyday foods? If this was helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and comment on what foods we should explore next.